Now, talk about coronavirus in Ghana seems to have generally quietened, but it's not the case in Germany. There are closures, restrictions, and new warnings. Germany and countries across Europe are reckoning with long-feared second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Health and public officials are intent on preventing a repeat of the widespread lockdowns from earlier this year, and Germany says it has a plan with winter approaching. Let's get more on the pandemic picture there with William Glucroft's correspondent with our partners DW in Berlin. William, it's good to have you. But before we go on to talk about coronavirus, news coming in suggests there is an update on the Russian politician seeking some sort of health care in Germany. Bring us up to speed.
Yes, it's easy to forget with all this coronavirus focus that there is other news going on in Germany. And the big news today from the Alexei Navalny front is that he's been released from the hospital. He was actually released yesterday, officials say. That's after more than a month of treatment in Berlin, most of which was in intensive care. And a lot of that time he was actually in an induced coma. So quite a rapid recovery given where we were just a few weeks ago, where he was really holding on to life by his fingertips. And now it's said that he will be doing some physical therapy to get his strength back. But what happens after this is now no longer a medical question, but a political question. And that we're going to have to see if he stays here, if he goes back to Russia, and what his really positioning is, and how Germany again responds in possible punishment for Russia's actions, and finding out exactly how this whole thing happened in the first place.
We'll see about the investigations and how it goes. But let's now come back and talk about coronavirus. Now, the situation seems to be getting worse. But how worse has it become for officials to now be even talking about returning to some of the measures we saw when the pandemic first hit?
Well, you mentioned at the top that it's not much of a, or less of a topic of conversation in Ghana, and that's a similar problem here, that scientists, public health officials, politicians, they keep trying to emphasize to the public that the pandemic is still very much with us, that it's still very dangerous. But among the public, it's very easy to get too relaxed, because relative to where we were in the springtime, with thousands and thousands of new cases every day, with tens of thousands of deaths, with the entire economy being shut down, it can feel, relative to that things are fine, that the virus is just in the background of our lives and we can go on as normal. That, of course, is hardly the case. Christian Drosten, he tweeted recently something I think that kind of summarizes where we're at right now, that yes, the mortality rate has dropped significantly from where we were at the peak, but that is not because the virus is easier or more mild or has somehow changed. It's that there's more testing, so we're finding more mild cases than we did before. It's that it's affecting younger people more than older people, like we saw at the beginning, and that it's no reason to let our guard down, and that things can change very quickly, as we're seeing here in Germany, where we've been flirting with almost 2,000 new cases a day. In France and Spain, more than 10,000 new cases a day. And in the United Kingdom, scientists there are fearing that by the middle of October, there could be 50,000 new cases until then, with almost 200 deaths per day. And that's leading to localized lockdowns, it's leading to new restrictions on public life, both here in Germany and all around Europe.
Talking about the restrictions, for the people who are where you are, what are they facing in terms of these restrictions?
Well, a new study is out today, a new poll is out today that shows that most Germans are pretty much ready for wider mask requirements. This is already happening in Munich, where the local authorities there have said that starting effective immediately, masks have to be worn out in public, outside, basically everywhere but your home. Right now, of course, it's been limited to the public transit, and if you're in a restaurant or a bar, or if you're in some public space where social distance can't be guaranteed, that's changing. And many Germans see that as becoming a reality, a fact of life, as we go into the colder months, that mask wearing is just going to be a thing that we have to do. We're also seeing not only around Europe travel restrictions and travel warnings, but even inside Germany, different German states are putting in travel restrictions and travel warnings about traveling between states. For example, in Bavaria, where Munich is the capital, and Baden-Württemberg, where Stuttgart is the capital, putting out warnings to hotels about who they can and cannot have at their hotels, and what kind of restrictions might be in place there. And of course, when it comes to sports, we have the new football season. This is something that is huge in Germany. But stadiums are limited to 20% capacity at the most. They still have to get approval from their local health administrations to allow that kind of capacity for fans. There's more control over people coming in and out of stadiums. There's alcohol bans, and these rules have to be enforced, and they have to be followed by people who really just want to go and watch the game and have a good time. So huge challenge to stick to these rules, especially as these rules might be getting harder, while people really want to return to some semblance of normalcy.
And talking about semblance of normalcy, a lot of people looked up to Germany, for example, when it started the Bundesliga, to try and return to that kind of normalcy. But what you talked about the weather, and you're entering winter. Talk about winter and wearing of masks. How are officials preparing for the winter months? We understand that, I mean, at least from the scientific assumptions, that winter seems to aid in the spread of this virus somehow.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we've been lucky so far. We're having a very warm September, which is allowing everyone to stay outside, meet friends in the park, or sit outside at a restaurant or a bar. But eventually that cold winter weather is going to be coming to Berlin and all of Germany. And that's going to force public life inside, which we know is not a safe place to be for passing particles around, that people who might have coronavirus spreading it. And we know that it brings the cold and flu, and those have very similar symptoms as coronavirus. And public health officials are really grappling with how to maintain some kind of public life, not go to a full-scale lockdown that we saw in the springtime, but still control this pandemic. The German health minister, Jens Spahn, he said that there's going to be what he's calling fever clinics. That's going to be separate locations, separate from hospitals and doctors' practices, where if you think you have coronavirus or you're showing symptoms of it, you can go there instead of a hospital. So that way you're separating yourself from patients while you're waiting to see if you in fact have coronavirus. There's also going to be new restrictions on people coming into the country and new kinds of testing and quarantine rules. But this, the German government has already said they're having trouble with implementing because it requires tracking people to make sure that they're actually staying home, staying in quarantine after returning to Germany until they can prove that they are negative from coronavirus. So there's a lot of technical hurdles, there's a lot of legal hurdles, a lot of ethical hurdles to keep the pandemic in check as we get into the colder months.
We'll be here to give our viewers updates on that, and also to perhaps warn people who want to travel around that side of the world. William, thank you so much for these updates. William Glocroft is correspondent with our partners DW, who's joining us for our usual weekly crossover all the way from Berlin here on The Pulse.